Welcome to the How to Do Your 20s podcast. If you're in your 20s and not satisfied with the standard boring path most of society recommends, then this is the show for you. Whether you want to just relax and travel or get paid for what you love doing, the goal of this podcast is to give you real, practical, how-to information with none of the fluffy, feel-good BS you get with other podcasts. I'm your host, Travis Marziani, and I, like most 20-somethings, worked hard to get into a good college so I could work hard to get a good job, because that is what society said I should do. After I finally got that nice corporate job, I realized I was completely unsatisfied with my life, and I didn't want to spend the next 40 years in the prison that is 9-to-5 life. So I quit my job so I could start my own online business, travel the world, and live life under my own terms. I'm not special, and I definitely wasn't born rich. Growing up, my dad cleaned pools and my mom was a seamstress. But we happen to be living in the most exciting, opportunity-filled time in human history, and I, for one, am going to take advantage of it. If you haven't already, go to howtodoyour20s.com to get the bonus episode I just did about 14 ways you can invest in yourself. If you want real ROI on your money, spend it improving yourself. That's howtodoyour20s.com. Now let's get started with this week's episode. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the science behind yoga, meditation, and chakras, and all kinds of crazy awesome stuff. And this episode, it might be a little out there for a lot of you, a little, I don't want to say woo-woo, but a little bit different. But I recommend listening with an open mind. And the quick story behind this is I met Elise at a yoga retreat when I went to Koh Phangan, Thailand, which is a beautiful island off the coast of Thailand. And the thing I really love about Elise is that she broke everything down into a scientific way of talking about it. And she's the first person I've ever heard talk about chakras, and I didn't think they were a crazy person afterwards. So I'm extremely excited about this episode. So first off, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I want to dive into your story because you have an interesting story, and I know that I've talked about it. A lot of my friends have talked about just kind of quitting the rat race and just going to an island to teach yoga, and you actually did it. So tell me a little bit about your story.
Well, I kind of went through the normal life that we all, well, maybe not all of us, that most of us kind of live in North America. I finished high school, I went to university, and I studied arts, linguistics, and English, religious studies. And in that, I kind of had an idea that I was going to keep going, get married, have kids, which I do still plan to do, but in the sort of way that all of us do it, married by 30, kids by 32, whatever, all of the things that we have planned. Mm-hmm. But in my first year of university, I was a varsity cross-country runner, and I started to get interested in yoga just simply as a stretching technique. I had a little bit of an idea about what it was about, that there was some sort of spirituality and philosophy involved in it, but for me, it started out as a purely physical thing. So at the same time, because part of my studies were religious studies, we were introduced to Hinduism and Buddhism. And again, I had a teacher that explained it in a really nice way that made it palpable for me, that made it something understandable. And so there was a little bit of an interest there. So I went to a yoga class and wasn't really expecting much. And I remember afterwards I called my mom and I said, "Mom, I don't know why people are on antidepressants. They should do yoga." So I started to go to a few more classes, and what started as a stretching routine became a lifestyle. And after, maybe a year, I started to do regular, if not daily, yoga practice. And so I was still doing my studies, and I was working as a personal trainer in a corporate gym. And again, I had this idea of where my life was going to go. And then, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I got sick. And I said, there's no way that this is going to take over my life. There's no way that this sickness is going to be something that's going to stop me. So I completely changed my life. And as I was almost done my studies, still it was overwhelming. And I decided to take a year off. And in that year, I took a yoga teacher training. In that yoga teacher training, my whole idea of what life was, what was important, it was completely flipped and turned upside down. And I ended up quitting my job, breaking up with my boyfriend, cutting off all my hair, moving my apartment, as the story goes. And in that transition, I moved in with a friend that I had met from yoga teacher training. And it just so happened that his best friend practiced what I now practice, Ashtanga yoga. And this was a beautiful way of exploring the body that, yes, it involved all those esoteric principles of chakra phenomenon, so the energy systems, energy pulsations that move through the body, but also it was the hardest workout I'd ever had, so I was sold. And 6 months after I had my first practice of Ashtanga Yoga, I decided to go to the birthplace of this practice, which was in Mysore, India. And after I went to Mysore, I realized that this was the life that I wanted to live, that the life that I had planned of the 2.5 children in, suburbia with a white picket fence and a minivan, it didn't seem right at that moment. And I knew that there was more to life. I knew that all the self-consciousness that I was feeling all through my teens and early 20s, I knew that this feeling of something not right, I knew that there was something behind that. So I decided to dive deeper into the practice. And by a series of coincidences, I was able to find a job in paradise. And it just came from literally trusting. It came from selling all my things in Canada and going to India and saying, okay, universe, let's see what happens. And I kid you not, the first day that I was in India, it was my 5th trip there, but the first day of my 5th trip, I had a friend come out of nowhere and say, hey, do you want a job in Thailand? That's how it started.
So I have a couple different questions about your story. The first one is, you said that you got sick. Is this something that was like a temporary thing that is now better, or is it something that's like more of a chronic thing and yoga helps you?
It was actually cervical cancer, and I healed it through only yoga.
Wow.
That was the thing that's like the big C word, that everybody has this fear about. And when that was, it never seems like it's a reality, but then all of a sudden it becomes a reality in your life. And that's when I said, no way, this is not happening to me. And I started to eat a vegan diet, which since then I'm no longer a strict vegan. I've started to kind of make it work for me, but for the most part, in that moment, I went very austere, and I started doing yoga practice. I meditated. I started to do visualizations of my body, and now my body is completely clean and clear.
What did your doctor say when you came back and told them, hey, I was just doing yoga and now I'm better?
Well, actually, I'm very lucky to have a doctor who is actually from an Indian family, and so it was no surprise to her. But I don't suggest this, but I had my initial treatments, and then I was kind of in a clear, and where I was supposed to be checked every 6 months, I instead decided to go to Asia and not have that done. And then I came back a few years later knowing that I was completely clear. And then I had a message from the Cancer Society, and my mom actually called me when I was in Thailand. Like, she wanted to post the thing to Facebook, like, you're completely clear, you're free.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah.
That's really exciting. And the next question I had for you is, you talked about Ashtanga yoga, and I obviously know the difference between that and other types of yoga, but can you talk a little bit about that?
That's right. So what we typically in the West know as yoga is actually what's called hatha yoga. So this means anytime that we're moving the body. So what we consider to be yoga, where we're doing all those shapes, you can think pretzel poses, this is actually one very teeny tiny portion of what yoga actually is. The word yoga means union. It means uniting this individual mind, self, like me as Elise or you as Travis. We think ourselves as an individual. What the process of yoga is allowing us to do is unite this individual identity or consciousness with something greater. And so we have many different techniques, many different tools to get there. And one of those tools, one of those techniques is through moving the body. So there's many different avenues, many different areas that you can go into when it comes to moving the body. And some people might be more familiar with Tai Chi, for example, or even Kung Fu. These are also means of manipulating the physical body to be able to move through blockages or pains or discomforts that there might be. In the yoga tradition, specifically more Indian style, we look to hatha yoga. So again, the word ha means sun and ta means moon. The right side of the body is said to be the sun channel, the ha channel. The left side of the body is said to be the moon, or the word ta. So to unite, again, there's that word union, unite the sun and the moon channel is hatha yoga. You're bringing the body back into balance. So a lot of people will think hatha yoga is a more slow or more relaxed style of yoga, but that's not necessarily the case. Just that's usually what people, especially in the West, attribute it to. So Ashtanga yoga, this particular style of hatha yoga that I practice, is actually called Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga. And this was a style that comes out of the south of India. And the late Sri K. Patabi Joyce, who was my teacher's grandfather, he was the one who was responsible for sort of bringing it to the West. And this is a system, it's based on 6 different series that all build on each other. And we all start obviously with the primary series and we keep growing from there. And every posture that's done in this sequence is a predecessor of the next posture to come. So the thing that makes Ashtanga yoga different than maybe traditional, what we would know as Hatha yoga, is it's more vigorous. The word vinyasa means to link movement and breathing. So every movement, every posture is done with the synchronization of breath.
And why do you personally like Ashtanga yoga better than other types of yoga?
I like that there's a sequence. I like that there's something that you continuously go back to and you can see how your body is growing and changing. But also, I have a background, as I said, I was a personal trainer, but also I've done a lot of research into sports therapy and sports medicine. And what I've seen is that the way that the practice works, it moves the body from the most basic and superficial movements easily and effortlessly goes into the more complex and deep movements, but it does it symmetrically. So the body opens, you start the practice with what are called sun salutations, and you're opening flexion and extension of the spine, and you're doing this with the synchronization of the breath. And then you move on to the second sun salutation, which the movements become a little bit more dynamic, and then the practice keeps going on and on that way. The thing that I personally find is that because it's the same thing, sure, people might say, okay, it's boring, but your body is able to grow with the practice. And so you're never going to be missing something. You know, when we go to, let's say, a traditional vinyasa class, which some of you might be familiar with, not to say there's anything wrong with any of that. It's all beautiful. It's all movement of the body. But when we go to different classes that are kind of whatever we want to do, we might miss certain movements. We might miss certain muscle groups. While this practice is designed to catch every single movement, every single way that your body can move, but it also works strength and flexibility at the same time. So from an exercise perspective, if you're looking at it that way, it's able to bring the body into balance. But also from a rehab perspective, it's able to balance out all of the issues that we might already be coming to the practice with.
You talked a little bit about why yoga works, but I want to dig in deeper, both to the scientific reasons why it works and the spiritual reasons why yoga works. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So from a completely scientific, let's say, physical standpoint, our bodies are our tools. They're our tools of sensations. And all the ways in which we engage with the world is done through our 5, or you can say 6 senses. We have the sense of sight, the sense of smell, the sense of touch, the sense of taste, the sense of sound, but also that 6th sense is a sense of thought. So we're engaging with the world through our senses, but without the physical body, we're not able to have that connection. So the body is really the tangible tool for our mind. And as we go through the world, as we go through our lives, there become points where we have maybe stress. So that could be an emotional or a mental stress, as we've all experienced, or it could be a physical stress. It could be an injury. It could be an illness. But all this to say, anytime something happens within the body will tense or cramp up. And just a simple example, when we're writing our exams for, or if we're going for a job interview, we notice how tight our shoulders and our jaw become. And if we don't have a means of releasing that tension, then that tension is just going to accumulate and accumulate. And by the time we get 30s, 40s, 50s, we lose so much range of motion. So to be able to, just on a physical level, move the body and breathe into the body daily, if not a couple times a week, then we can eliminate a lot of the problems that might come up later on in our life. So really we're extending our lifespan and we're extending the health that's able to move through our body. Now, on an energetic level, bear with me here, inside the physical body, along the nervous system. So we all can agree in scientific terms that we have the central nervous system, the autonomic nervous system that moves within the body. We have the sympathetic nervous system. We have the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is more of our action response. It's how we move in the world. It's what we do, how we have activities, how we have energy, where the parasympathetic nervous system is more of the respond. So even though we might be engaging in regular exercise, most of our life is based on this sort of sympathetic nervous system action. That means that we're always out, we're always doing, we're always thinking, we're always talking, we're seeing. And the only time we really have to rest is when we sleep at night. And so what we're trying to establish, hopefully, is an ability to balance out this nervous system function, parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, by allowing more time to relax, to restore. So on an energetic level, like I was saying, this nervous system that's housed within the vertebrae, within the spine, in the body, we have all these channels that are moving, that are creating these responses. So we have a thought, and I can move my hand without even thinking about it. And let's say there's a disease or a sickness or an injury, something that happens in my hand, then I might not be able to have that ability to move my hand until it's regained its health, till the disease is gone. So on an energetic level, that there's a system called the nadi system. And the word nadi means little river. And these nadis run more or less parallel to the nervous system that we know so well through the scientific system. So these nadis are not necessarily visible to the naked eye. They're not necessarily even visible with our most powerful microscopes, because it's said that one of these little channels, one of these little rivers, is 1/100th the size of one of our hairs. And these little rivers, what do? Well, they carry what's called prana. And the word prana means life force. If you look at a human body, dead or alive, the thing that makes the body alive is the breath, the prana, the life force. So this life force, this breath that's moving through our systems, is what gives the body that character of aliveness. So we have these little rivers that move through every single cell of our being. And there's actually 72,000 of these little rivers or nadis that are moving through us. And the same way that whenever we come into a stressful situation, again, be it physical, mental, emotional, energetic, whenever we have a stress that comes on our system, one of these nadis is said to be blocked. And hence the word disease, if you break it down, dis-ease. So whenever one of these nadis becomes blocked, whenever the prana or the life force is no longer able to flow as it needs to, there's no longer a sense of ease, and thus there becomes a dis-ease. So the practice of yoga, when right now we're talking about the physical asana or the postures that we do in yoga, when we breathe into the body and we're moving and synchronizing the breath and the movement together, it's almost as though we're unplugging those stuck channels. And this is why when we first come to the practice, it's so hard to breathe when you're doing, let's say, a deep twist, or you're trying to bend into a back bend, so opening the chest, moving into extension of the spine. So with time and with practice, and this is another reason why I like the Ashtanga yoga practice so much, because it's the same thing repeated. So with time and with practice, you're able to move through these blockages, these stuck, you can say, energies, so that the body can feel vibrant, so that we can feel in control of our entire systems.
Wow. Okay. So my first question, I guess, is if someone's not doing yoga and let's say they don't have the money to go to a yoga retreat, what's the best way to get started with doing yoga?
Well, actually, when I first started to practice yoga, I had no money. I was a student, and I was able to go to maybe one class at my community center. And this is another reason why I love Ashtanga yoga so much, because you can go online and you can find YouTube videos, you can find PDFs of how the system works, and you can do your practice in your bedroom on your own. The other beautiful thing about this practice is that I'm what's called an authorized teacher of this system. And so I have been given permission by my teacher to teach this way, the same way that he was taught by his grandfather, Pattabhi Jois. So any Ashtanga yoga teacher who has been authorized is going to teach the same system the same way. This means as a student, you can go anywhere in the world where Ashtanga yoga is taught, and you can learn basic principles, and then you can go home and do it on your own. So my suggestion to somebody who says, okay, I have an interest in starting yoga, I would say, the internet is such a beautiful resource. Look up on YouTube, Ashtanga yoga. You'll see some pretty crazy videos. You'll see some people doing all kinds of gymnastic postures, but it's really important to remember that takes a long time. And it's also really important to remember that success in yoga does not mean success or being able to do beautiful poses. Success in yoga means being able to control your mind, means being able to control your breathing, means being able to stay easy and comfortable in very challenging or even uncomfortable positions or situations.
So for someone like myself that they've been doing yoga for a little while, do you have any advice, things that you see that not beginners, like the more beginner level people, mistakes that they make, and you're thinking to yourself, oh man, you need to improve X, Y, and Z, like typical mistakes that are made?
Yes. So the most important thing, I've said it already and I'll say it a million times more, is the breathing. So what we do in Ashtanga Yoga is a breath technique. It's called free breathing with sound. Maybe I'll be able to get the sound of it over the internet, but it sounds like this. So I'm not sure if you were able to hear that.
Yep, it sounded great.
So it kind of sounds like Darth Vader.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is I'm constricting the back of my throat. My mouth is closed. I'm still breathing in and out through my nose, but I'm constricting what's called the glottis, just the muscles at the back of the throat there, almost like you're about to snore, or like that, trying to check your breath, the kind of thing, but with your mouth closed. So what that does is allows us to control how much breath is coming in and out of the body at one time. So this is even just as a basic yoga practice, this free breathing with sound is more than enough to do. So my basic suggestion to anybody who's starting a practice of yoga is that this breathing, more than anything else, should be the main focus. Without the breath, the postures of yoga remain nothing more than gymnastics. So to be able to synchronize the movement with the breathing, this is a really good thing. And yes, there's a lot of things to think about when we first start a yoga practice. It's a little bit like driving a car, especially when you go to a yoga class and you see the teacher at the front of the room who's doing all these kind of fancy gymnastic looking things and you're sitting at the back like, huh? So the best thing to kind of look through that is to understand that the teacher's probably been doing this a long time. And if you've driven a car, you remember the first time that you've gotten behind the wheel. It's like forget about a manual transmission, even just driving automatic. There you have to steer, you have to know where the signals are, you have to know where the wipers are, you have to know where the horn is, the brake versus the gas. So same thing. So you only start with as much as you know, as much as you can handle, as much as is easy for you to do and is realistic for you to do. So to be able to breathe into the body, move into the body, never overstretch into the body, only go to that what's called your edge. Your edge is that place where it's a little bit uncomfortable, but still within your means. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. I want to transition to meditation, but before I do that, my last question about yoga. You talked about how yoga is all about the union, and I want to dig a little bit deeper into that. And you talked about sun and moon, parasympathetic and sympathetic. Is it creating a union between those two, or talk a little bit more about that, I guess?
That's right. So before we kind of started talking about science, let's say a couple hundred years ago, this knowledge wasn't even anything that was out of the world. People just kind of understood that there needed to be a balance between work and rest. So the right side of the body is corresponding to left brain function. It actually crosses just above the nose. So the right side of the body, the right nostril, is all corresponding to the left brain. And for those of you who are familiar with left brain function, this is like linear thinking, putting things into a box. This is outward focused action. And then the left side of the body, which is connected to the left nostril, right side of the brain, this is more creativity or restoring or relaxing. So these two principles create balance. And unfortunately, where we are in our world today, we've gotten very much out of balance, that we never get the opportunity to rest and relax. So the goal of yoga, we come to yoga for a lot of us as relaxation. I'm stressed. I need to relax. I need to breathe better. I need to do all of this kind of thing. And so this is why we're learning how to balance both of those polarities there. And what that's going to give us is the ability to respond to a situation versus react to a situation. So again, we're talking the parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system, or you can say parasympathetic moon channel, which is the right brain function, which is the relaxation receptivity, and sympathetic nervous system, right body, solar function, outward focus. So what we're learning how to do is to bridge those two gaps together so that in a situation, we're not only reacting. When we're only relying on our right body, left brain function, what in science we know are fight or flight. This is done with our adrenal glands. So this is the ability, so something comes into our life, a stimulus, and we see it either as a risk that we need to run away from or we need to fight up against. But when we never get the opportunity to relax, when we never get the opportunity to restore ourselves, we always feel that we're under stress. We always feel that we're in this fight or flight. And when we never get the opportunity to restore and relax, our adrenal glands, which produce the chemicals epinephrine, norepinephrine, they become taxed and they become empty. And so the body is seeing everything as a threat. So it could be something so menial, it could be something so simple. Someone comes up to us and they have the best intentions in mind, but because our hormones are completely drained, because we're always in this system of attack, we're not hearing what the other person is saying, and we're not actually responding to what they're giving to us. Instead, we're reacting to what we believe they're saying to us. So what we need to do through whether it's yoga, whether it's meditation, whether it's even just body-brain balancing, is be able to come more into the right brain function, to the parasympathetic nervous system, where we can finally relax, where we can finally restore ourselves, where we can finally come to a place where we can see things with understanding rather than just putting our own informations and our own psychological imprints on it.
Is there people in society today that you think are too right brain focused? There's obviously a lot, including myself, that are way too left brained, out of balance. Do you see that on the opposite side happening?
Less so. I personally know, but I'm sure, absolutely. I'm sure that there are people that might have, let's say, given up on their lives. People that have disengaged with life, disengaged with society, disengaged with acting in their lives, and then maybe they get a little bit tired and maybe that they need a little bit of a push. And so this is why the Hatha yoga is so beautiful, because it's giving us something to stimulate that left brain function, that sympathetic nervous system. It's pushing us, it's allowing us to grow. It's allowing us to be out there in the world in a very healthy way, but then at the same time, it balances with the relaxation so that we can actually take in the benefits of everything that we're doing.
Awesome. All right, let's talk about meditation. Do you meditate every day? I know you obviously do yoga every day, but do you meditate as well?
I do. I do meditation in the mornings and in the evenings.
And why meditation? We talked a lot about why yoga is so helpful. What is it about meditation, and how do you meditate? I guess that's two different questions. So first off, let's say, how do you meditate? What does your meditation practice look like?
Well, there are many different ways of meditation. And it's so just to bring us back to Ashtanga yoga. The word Ashtau in Sanskrit means 8 and Anga means limbs. So what Ashtanga yoga means is there are 8 different facets or 8 different branches, paths that you can follow, and you can follow them at the same time to be able to control the mind, to be able to come to a state of wholeness, a state of wellness. And one of those paths is the postures, is the asana, is the physical yoga practice. And one of them is also meditation, something called dhyan. So, or dhyana, some people say. So the real practice of meditation means that the mind is stilled. Now, in reality, this is not possible for most of us. Most of us have too many things that are going on. We have so many different things going on in our brains, different things going on in our lives, that the minute that we sit down to actually meditate, if you will, we start thinking about our shopping list. We start thinking about our boyfriend or our girlfriend. We start thinking about all the things that we want to do, all the things that we have to do. Anyways, we close our eyes and we can't come to that state of peace. Instead, we come to the state of chaos. So before we get into a real practice of meditation, the first 2 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga are really important to be explored. And these are called yama and niyama. And the word yama means restraint. And these are restraints that we put on ourselves and ways that we engage with the rest of the world. And they're very simple. They might not seem that out of the ordinary, but for most of us, we've lost the connection with it. And these 5 yamas are nonviolence. It's called ahimsa. So nonviolence to yourself, kindness or compassion, nonviolence, kindness or compassion to other people and to the planet. The second one is called satya, and this means truth. Truth, telling the truth, being honest, but also being authentic, living up to what's inside our own hearts and not only what other people or society is telling us to do. Asteya, which means non-stealing. So non-stealing of physical property, you don't steal people's money, you don't take cars, you don't break and enter into someone's home, but also being very aware of not stealing other people's energy, being able to be self-sufficient, being able to take care of our own selves. The fourth one is called brahmacharya, which has many controversial translations, but what I like to think of, the word Brahman means ultimate reality, ultimate consciousness. So brahmacharya then means someone who is in line with the highest principles. So they're not taking advantage of other people or other things. They're knowing how to moderate themselves. The path of yoga, you can say, is the middle path. So we're not renouncing anything. We're not taking ourselves away from life, but we're also not indulging in anything too much. So we're allowing ourselves, like I said, to ride that middle path of knowing when enough is enough, for not unconsciously consuming, but instead enjoying. And this also is practicing sexuality in a way that we're not taking advantage of anyone or anything. Understanding that our sexual energy is actually very precious and very important, so that we should keep that we should only give that to people who can give the kind of respect that we deserve back. And then the last one is called aparigraha, which means non-addictions. And if we practice these 5 principles, you can see that all the dramas that we have in our lives, all the things that kind of take us away, that distract us, if we're actually practicing these 5 principles, many of those dramas will be completely eradicated. And then we have the niyamas, which are saucha, which means cleanliness. You might have heard cleanliness is next to godliness. Well, there's something in that. Let's just say a simple example, when your house or your room is clean, you feel so much better. It feels like a sanctuary. But when there's stuff all over the place, you don't want to be there. So if we practice cleanliness of our external environment, of our internal environment, of our mind and our body, we can feel much more at ease. We practice contentment. So we're practicing making ourselves happy. We're finding little reasons, finding little things throughout the day, throughout our lifetimes, to be able to make ourselves in a more content, happy place. We practice tapas, which means austerity or discipline. And it doesn't matter what your discipline is. Sure, it could be meditation. Sure, it could be yoga. But it also could be, let's say, rock climbing. It could be playing an instrument. Anything that we can come back to again and again that faces us, that makes us face ourselves and makes us see the parts of ourselves that maybe we don't like so much, but that we can work on. Then we have swadhyaya, which means self-study. And this is holding ourselves accountable to the changes that we're doing, but also studying higher philosophies. And this doesn't necessarily have to be yoga philosophy, but anything that makes our brain expand, anything that opens our scope, anything that makes us see the world from a bigger perspective. And finally, Ishvara Pranidhana. And the word Ishvara means your chosen idea of what divinity is. And it doesn't necessarily have to be God. For me, that's the word that I use, and that's my understanding, but it's not necessarily what everyone has to adhere to. It could be Great Spirit. It could be universe. It could be the Big Bang. It could be the process of evolution. Whatever it is that your own mind understands as being the thing that kind of is underneath this process of life, this is Ishvara. And Ishvara Pranidhana means to surrender to that. So the reason why we're actually doing all of this stuff, practicing all of these things, is so that we can have a tangible and real understanding of what that is. So now we practice this yama, this niyama, maybe the asana, to be able to move through the body. The other thing about asana, posture, the word as, I think it's hilarious. It means a good seat, something good to sit on. So when we get our body stretched and strong, we can sit for long periods of time. So then the body is strong and stable. The mind is not so distracted by all of the things our conscious is telling us that we've done. And then we can come to a place where the mind can be still. So why meditation? Why do we actually need it? Why do we actually do it? Well, we come back to that idea of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. We come back to that idea of chilling out. Now in our world, we do not get a moment to breathe. The minute that we wake up in the morning, we're already late before we even leave the house. We're running to get to our jobs. We're sitting in front of computers. We're going to all sorts of expositions and galleries or maybe cinemas, and we're always engaging our attention with the outside world. And the more that we engage our attention with the outside world, we might not realize it, but we're stressing ourselves out. So our ability to cope and handle a stressful situation is becoming less and less the more and more we're engaging with the world around us. So meditation, if for nothing else, is the best way to learn how to restore all of the basic functions in the body, restore the tissues in our body, restore our ability to think clearly, restore our ability to have relationships with other people, restore our ability to listen without expectation. So by doing a daily practice, and for me, I mean, it's not necessary to do a twice-a-day practice, but for me it is. I do a practice in the morning so I can get a grip on how I'm feeling before I have to enter in my day. And then in the evening, I get the chance to digest and assimilate everything that happened to me in the day so that I can rest easily and I can engage in the world in a way that's conscious.
How long, when you do meditation in the morning and at night, how long are you doing it for? And are you just focusing on your breath? Is there some kind of counting pattern you do? What does your meditation practice look like?
So my meditation practice has evolved through the years, but what I've found is the most simple meditation is to count the breathing. And if you've never done any kind of meditation before, this technique, you can even use the sounded breath, which I did before, but is just inhale 1, exhale 1, inhale 2, exhale 2, and count the breath that way. And you can set a little timer. For me, I do 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening. If I have time, I'll do a little bit longer. But 20 minutes is more than enough. For a lot of people beginning the practice of meditation, 20 minutes is not possible, and that's okay. 5 minutes is more than enough. 5 minutes to sit down and to feel the breathing. Now, one of the techniques that I do daily is a technique where you're feeling this sensation from the tips of the toes, and you move the awareness from the tips of the toes up the legs, both of the legs, to the hips, to the trunk of the body, the front and back, to the chest, to the upper back, to the arms, down into the hands, the neck, into the jaw, into the head, into the muscles of the face, into the crown of the head, and maybe even into the brain. And so this is something that you can take your time, and you can take a whole hour moving through the different sensations in your body, or you can do a quick body scan in 5 minutes. So these are two techniques that are really easy to begin with. And like I said, 5 minutes to begin is enough. Just counting the breath and feeling the breath, controlling the breath. This is something that's really new to a lot of us. So I would suggest starting with that. And then as you get more comfortable sitting for longer periods of time, then start to do a mental scan from the tips of the toes to the crown of the head.
With the counting method, when you get up to 100, do you go back down to 0, or how high up can you go?
Right. So what I begin is to 10. And it seems really simple, count from 1 to 10 and then start back at 1. It might get boring. But the way that I teach this technique is that the minute that you start thinking, so let's say you're trying to count to 1, 2, and then all of a sudden you start thinking about what's happening that night, what I'm going to have for dinner, what this person did, what I'm going to buy there. And all of a sudden your mind takes you away and you've stopped counting. As soon as you realize you stopped counting, you start back at 1. And then a lot of us, too, we're really good at multitasking, especially nowadays. So we can still count to 10, but we can think about all sorts of different things. So the idea is to only concentrate on counting the breathing. So the minute that we've realized we've run away somewhere with our mind, it doesn't matter what took us away from the breath, what kind of thought distracted us, but instead just bring ourselves back to 1 and start again. Now, with time, if you do finally get to 10, then you can start to increase it. And the highest that I go is to the number 108. And then if you succeed on getting to 108, start back at 1. Now, a lot of people now ask, why 108? Okay. 108 is a sacred number. And the more that you learn about yogic philosophy, you see this number 108 come back again and again. This is the number of life. In the human body, we have pulsations, and this is something that you can connect to on your own. We have the pulsation of our heartbeat. We have the different pulse points in our body, and we all know these, we've all felt these. And as a meditation as well, you can sit down, close your eyes, come to a quiet space, and try to feel your heart beating in your chest. Now, this heartbeat is only one of 108 pulsations that's actually moving through the body. And the human body is a microcosm of the planet Earth. So it's a representation, a smaller version of what actually is happening in the planet Earth. And in the planet Earth, the same as the body, there are 108 pulsations. The Earth, the planet Earth in our solar system is kind of what I like to call in the Goldilocks part of the solar system. That it's not too close and it's not too far away from the sun that life has been able to be sustained here. So interestingly enough, the diameter of the Earth, so the distance from one side of the Earth to the other side, you would be able to fit 108 Earths from the Earth to the sun. So this number comes back again and again as this sort of sustenance of life. Now, there's also a technique of meditation called japa mala. And you might have seen a lot of people wear them now as fashion, these mala beads, these beaded necklaces around their necks. And these malas also contain 108 beads, and these come from ancient societies of counting for meditation. And if you've ever seen Catholicism, the rosary, saying Hail Marys as you move your way through the rosary beads. Well, it's the same principle, the same idea, that you say a breath or a mantra, which is a specific word or sentence that's repeated again and again. And so you move through these 108 beads, and then when you finish a round, which is the 108, then you can move on again.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot there. I want to, actually, before we move on to chakras, I was curious about earth pulsation. You talked about there's like pulsations in earth, just like our heartbeat. What's an example of one of these?
An example of the pulsations in the earth.
Yes.
So if you travel to different countries, which obviously you have, but anybody else out there who's traveled to different countries or maybe even different states in the US, there's something that you can't really explain. But when you step off a plane or you step out of the car, there's a different feeling that you get. There's a different, we can call it vibration. So every different place in the earth has its own feeling, has its own vibration. And so from the center of the earth, where it's quite warm because of where the sun hits, but also the center of the earth might have a lower vibration. So as we talk about the chakra system next, this will also come into play because the earth also has its own chakra system. So it's the pulsation in the center of the earth might be a little bit slower. And then as you move up through higher poles in the earth, then you're going to get higher vibrations, so faster senses of pulsations. So these pulsations are not necessarily something that you can feel like when you put your hand on your heartbeat, on your heart, but this is something that if you take your shoes off and you go stand out in the woods, I know it sounds crazy, but give it a try. You go stand out in the woods, you can actually feel a heartbeat coming underneath the earth. And different places that you go in the earth will have a slightly different rhythm and pulsation there.
I'm going to pause the podcast here, and I'm going to continue the other half of this episode next week. This ended up being an hour, 40 minutes of me and Elise talking. It was a really interesting conversation, and some of the stuff I know might sound a little too out there for a lot of you, but if nothing else, look at this as kind of a way of seeing what other people in the world think, kind of a study on the different religious aspects and beliefs that are out there, and maybe you'll find that some of the things aren't quite as crazy as you thought. We're going to do the next episode, we're going to talk about chakras and a few other things, and once again, chakras have this kind of hippy-dippy vibe to them, but I think if you listen to the next episode, you'll see that there's actually some scientific backing when explained properly behind what a quote-unquote chakra is. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video, and if you did, make sure you hit the big red subscribe button down below. You can also check me out on Facebook and on Twitter, and I release a new video every Monday, and by hitting that subscribe button, you'll get those new videos every Monday. And this is really a podcast. It's also a website. You can check out the website. It's howtodoyour20s.com. I'll put a link right over here as well. And what it's all about is trying to improve your life. And we specifically focus on things that people in their 20s are interested in. So make sure you like the video if you liked it. Subscribe. Like us on Facebook and Twitter, whatever. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you again on another video.